What if everything you thought you knew about Meghan Markle was a lie? Princess and reveals the truth, and it's far darker than we imagined. In a stunning new revelation, Princess and shatters the carefully crafted image Meghan Markle has spent years building. The princess claims Meghan's royal persona was nothing more than a performance, rehearsed, manipulative, and fake. Behind closed doors, Meghan allegedly treated the royal staff like servants, and in public, she fought to overshadow Kate at every turn. But the worst accusation of all, Meghan reportedly weaponized her own victimhood for control. Stay tuned as we expose the shocking truth behind the headlines and reveal the untold story no one is talking about. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It all began not with a press release, not with a television interview, and certainly not with a carefully choreographed photo op. It began with a glare. A single, icy look from Princess and across the room at a Buckingham Palace reception. One so piercing, so intentional, that those close enough to witness it went silent. Cameras flashed. Champagne glasses clinked. But beneath the surface of royal smiles and diamond brooches, there was tension thicker than the palace walls themselves. For years, Princess Anne had kept her counsel, bound by the unspoken code of royal discretion. But what she had seen unfold within the walls of the monarchy, the performance, the ambition, the manipulation, could no longer be buried under ceremony and silence. And so, for the first time, the Princess Royal chose to break ranks. This was not some tabloid fabrication, nor was it a palace leak aimed at spin. This was Anne, stern, stoic, fiercely loyal to the crown, making a choice to reveal what she claimed to be the truth. Not speculation, not rumor. Truth. The real Meghan Markle. Not the dazzling Duchess adored on the red carpet, not the grieving victim seen in high-profile interviews, but the woman behind the veil. The actress, yes, but more so, the architect. Of narrative, of influence, of a royal legacy rewritten in her image. Anne's decision didn't come easily. For decades, she had watched her family endure scandals, betrayal, and relentless media invasions. She had stayed silent through the tumult of Charles and Diana, through the disgrace of Andrew, through the slow erosion of public trust in the very institution she devoted her life to protect. But something about Meghan was different. It wasn't just the disruption. It wasn't even the endless headlines or the Netflix specials. It was what Anne saw behind closed doors, the disregard for tradition, the hunger for attention, the quiet but devastating trail of staff and protocol shattered in the name of modernity. This was not rebellion. This, Anne believed, was manipulation masked as progress. And it had gone too far. According to sources closest to the inner circle, Anne had first voiced her concerns in private, long before Meghan and Harry's explosive departure from royal duties. Her words were sharp, but measured. She rehearses that smile like it's a monologue, and once allegedly said during a family meeting, referring to Meghan's public appearances, "None of it is real, and the institution will pay the price if no one stops it." At the time, many brushed it off as Anne's typical no-nonsense demeanor. But over time, her observations began to align with what others were quietly whispering behind palace walls. Staff members began to resign in waves. Long-standing aides who had served the crown with loyalty for years suddenly walked out, citing emotional exhaustion and mistreatment. And noticed. She paid attention. Where others saw coincidence, she saw a pattern. And when she finally confronted senior royals about it, she didn't hold back. "We are not supporting a duchess," she allegedly said in a tense meeting. "We are supporting a performance. And we're letting it rewrite everything the monarchy stands for." But why now? Why, after all the chaos, the interviews, the exile to America, the palace investigations, why would Anne choose this moment to finally go public with her opinion? Because, as sources revealed, there was one final straw. It wasn't a televised interview or a social media rant. It wasn't even a political move. It was a private letter, written by Meghan, intended for the Queen, but intercepted by Anne's private secretary. The letter reportedly urged the monarch to publicly denounce what Meghan described as institutional silence on race, family loyalty, and the mental toll royal life had taken on her. But what struck Anne wasn't the content. It was the tone, the entitlement, the subtle yet pointed manipulation wrapped in victimhood. She's not asking for empathy, Anne reportedly told a confidant. She's demanding obedience. And if we comply, we become servants to a story, not stewards of a monarchy. What Princess Anne was doing wasn't petty. It wasn't personal. It was, in her eyes, preservation. She wasn't fighting Meghan because she disliked her. She was fighting for the legacy of her mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, who had spent 7 decades balancing tradition with quiet, unshakable duty. To Anne, Meghan's approach wasn't modern. It was opportunistic. And the more the world applauded it, the more the monarchy's foundation cracked beneath the weight of spectacle. There was a deeper fear, too, not just about image, but about influence. Meghan's rise had weaponized sympathy and celebrity in a way the palace had never seen before. Her narrative wasn't just being heard, it was being believed. Globally, devout royalists were being outnumbered by social media armies who saw Meghan as a hero, a feminist icon, a racial pioneer in a suffocating white institution. And Anne, traditional, blunt, and uninterested in PR wars, was watching her family become characters in someone else's script. In conversations behind palace doors, Anne raised concerns not just about Meghan's behavior, but about Harry's transformation. He's become a co-star in her production, she reportedly said. And the more the cameras roll, the more the man disappears. And had always been close to Harry. She admired his military service, respected his independence, even defended him during moments of youthful rebellion. But now, she barely recognized him. Anne's decision to speak was met with resistance. Some advisors urged silence. Others feared backlash. But Anne didn't flinch. If we lose the truth, we lose everything, she told a trusted aide. Let the world call me bitter. I'll wear that crown if it means defending this one. The timing of her statement also mattered. With King Charles facing increasing scrutiny over health, succession pressure mounting, and William and Kate struggling to modernize a monarchy riddled with fractures, Anne's revelation threatened to shake the very ground of Windsor once more. But perhaps that was the point. Anne wasn't looking to bury Meghan. She was demanding honesty in an era of spin. And she knew the palace couldn't afford another silent retreat. Not this time. So what did she say exactly? Over the next several segments, we will unravel the statements, one by one, each more startling than the last. From claims that Meghan's royal image was rehearsed like a script, to damning accounts of how she allegedly treated palace staff as disposable, to accusations that she weaponized her status as a victim to gain global sympathy. Princess Anne's testimony is not just explosive. It's historic. And as we dive deeper, we'll look beyond the soundbites. We'll examine the implications. What does this mean for the monarchy's future? Can the institution survive another blow to its integrity? And perhaps most importantly, can the truth still matter in an age where perception is everything? Buckle up. What follows isn't tabloid gossip. It's a reckoning. Because now, finally, the crown has decided to speak for itself. There's a reason why millions around the world were captivated by Meghan Markle the moment she stepped into the royal spotlight. Her smile seemed genuine, her posture graceful, her words carefully chosen but warm. To the public, she embodied the perfect blend of Hollywood glamour and humanitarian depth. A biracial American actress marrying into the most traditional and scrutinized monarchy in the world, she was a living symbol of modern change. But if you ask Princess Anne, none of that was ever real. Not the compassion. Not the humility. Not even the connection to duty. According to Anne, what the world saw was a role, rehearsed and refined to perfection. She rehearsed her royal image like a script, and reportedly said during a private conversation with senior courtiers, every wave, every tear, every charitable cause, it was delivered like lines on a stage. Nothing was spontaneous. Nothing was sincere. These words didn't come from jealousy or disdain. They came from decades of experience. And the only daughter of Queen Elizabeth II had been raised in the royal crucible. She understood duty not as a choice, but a burden. And from her vantage point, Meghan wasn't embracing that burden. She was exploiting it. This was not the first time the royal family had experienced theatrical flair within its ranks. Princess Diana, too, had used her image to captivate hearts across the globe. But Diana's emotional transparency had, in many ways, come from deep wounds. Meghan, in Anne's opinion, weaponized charm without the bruises. There's a difference between being vulnerable and being manipulative, and allegedly confided to her brother Charles. I'm not sure she knows the difference. During the early days of Meghan's royal life, Anne made a point of observing her closely, not out of suspicion, but out of responsibility. As one of the monarchy's most seasoned working royals, Anne had a reputation for cutting through illusions. While others were swept up in the novelty of Meghan's arrival, Anne watched. She watched how Meghan carried herself during state visits. how she spoke to junior staff, how she controlled the tempo of every interaction, every appearance. It was calculated, she believed, more reminiscent of press tours and Hollywood junkets than the subdued dignity of royal protocol. One such incident, according to insiders, took place during a Commonwealth charity event hosted at St. James's Palace. Meghan arrived late, wearing a striking designer dress that had no relation to the organization's dress code. Cameras were already waiting. As she exited the car, she paused for the flashes, longer than necessary. The event had nothing to do with fashion or fanfare. It was about youth education in post-colonial territories. But Meghan turned it into a red carpet moment. It was a cause. She made it a stage, and allegedly said afterward. But perhaps the most glaring example of Meghan's so-called performance came during her first solo engagement as Duchess. On the surface, it was a triumph. Meghan visited the Royal Academy of Arts, greeted patrons, gave a well-received speech, and dazzled in a sleek Givenchy dress. Yet behind closed doors, and wasn't impressed. She had reviewed the footage multiple times. It was flawless, she admitted, but too flawless. There was no room for vulnerability, no sign she was absorbing the gravity of the moment. It was a show, and she played it well. And wasn't alone in this assessment. Several senior aides began to raise concerns about what they described as image obsession. Meghan reportedly insisted on previewing all official photos before they were published, a breach of royal protocol which usually entrusts official media with full editorial control. She allegedly clashed with photographers over lighting and angles. In meetings, she was said to speak less about the purpose of engagements and more about optics, how to maximize coverage, how to appear relatable, how to stand out. She didn't want to just be a duchess, one aide noted. She wanted to be iconic. To Anne, this was dangerous. The monarchy's power lies in restraint, in dignity, in presence, not performance. And Meghan's methods, though wildly effective in winning public sympathy, were, in Anne's view, dismantling the very ethos of royalty. She worried that the crown was being repackaged into a celebrity brand, with Meghan as the CEO. A particularly chilling moment for Anne came when she learned of Meghan's pre-marriage research. While most royal brides entered the family with a mixture of awe and trepidation, Meghan had reportedly studied the institution like an audition. According to former aides, she devoured old footage of Diana, memorized speeches by Queen Elizabeth, and even rehearsed her royal wave in front of a mirror. She wanted to be royal, a source explained, but on her terms. This realization shook Anne. It wasn't about preparation, it was about ambition. Meghan hadn't stumbled into royalty, she had targeted it. And that made her presence within the firm not just disruptive, but strategic. "We are not nurturing a duchess," Anne is said to have told palace advisors. "We are cultivating a brand that sees us as accessories." Even her acts of supposed humility were viewed with skepticism. The surprise trips to charities, the handwritten notes, the emotional speeches about mental health. On paper, they were commendable, but Anne noted a pattern. They always coincided with critical media cycles. They always followed negative headlines. And they always managed to shift the narrative back in Meghan's favor. "It's not empathy," Anne allegedly said. "It's crisis management, dressed up as compassion." This growing disillusionment culminated in a private family summit at Sandringham, when the Sussexes first announced their departure from royal duties. While the public saw a divided family grappling with a shocking decision, behind closed doors, Anne took the floor. Calm but resolute, she looked Charles in the eye and said, "We should have seen this coming." She told us who she was the moment she smiled for the cameras. "We just didn't want to believe it." Even now, years after the split, Anne maintains her belief that Meghan's public persona was an elaborate performance. Not because she harbors resentment, but because she believes in truth. And in Anne's world, truth must be earned, not staged. For viewers who admire Meghan, these claims will seem harsh, possibly cruel. But for those who have spent a lifetime inside the palace walls, watching the monarchy evolve through scandal, duty, and sacrifice, Anne's perspective is not born of pettiness. It is born of pain, of watching an institution built on centuries of discipline be twisted into a headline machine. As the dust continues to settle and the world tries to reconcile two wildly different portraits of the Duchess of Sussex, one of grace, one of guile, Anne's voice cuts through the noise with unsettling clarity. "We didn't lose Meghan," she reportedly said. "We lost the line between performance and reality. And we handed her the script." The whispers started long before the tabloids caught wind of it. At first, they were brushed aside as misunderstandings. Differences in work culture, perhaps, or the natural friction that comes when a newcomer joins an age-old institution. But then the departures began. Quiet, unannounced, and curiously timed. One after another, staffers who had once been dedicated to serving the monarchy suddenly handed in their resignations, often citing burnout, emotional distress, or simply offering no public explanation at all. Those inside the palace knew what the outside world didn't yet suspect. The problem wasn't the job. The problem, allegedly, was Meghan, princess, and was among the first to take notice. Known for her fierce loyalty to the crown and her no-nonsense demeanor, and paid close attention to the behavior of palace staff. Unlike some other royals, she made it a point to learn names, observe routines, and maintain long-standing relationships with those who kept the royal engine running behind the scenes. So when trusted individuals began to resign shortly after Meghan and Harry's wedding, and didn't dismiss it as coincidence, she doesn't treat them like people, and reportedly told a senior official. She treats them like they're props on a set. Replaceable. Invisible. The allegations weren't just based on tone or attitude. They were specific. Detailed. Some of the most damning came from a group of aides collectively referred to within the palace as the Sussex Survivors Club, a term reportedly coined among themselves to reflect the emotional toll of working under Meghan. They described their experience not as royal service, but as psychological warfare. One aide claimed Meghan once berated her in front of other staff for failing to procure a specific candle scent requested for a private dinner. Another recounted an incident in which Meghan allegedly dismissed a staffer mid-conversation with the wave of a hand, without even making eye contact. These stories, though shocking, rarely reached the public in real time. The palace operated under a culture of silence and discretion. Non-disclosure agreements were common, and loyalty was often valued more than transparency. Yet the emotional damage lingered. Staff who had previously served other senior royals without issue were suddenly breaking down in tears, some even seeking therapy. One private secretary, who had spent over a decade serving the crown, allegedly described her time with Meghan as the most dehumanizing period of her career, and whose interactions with staff were rooted in mutual respect and tradition, found this unacceptable. She believed that the monarchy's strength rested not only in its public image but in its internal structure, its people. And if Meghan was undermining that structure with entitlement and cruelty, and felt she had not only the right, but the obligation to call it out. What made these reports more disturbing was the alleged pattern. Meghan's interactions with staff reportedly followed a cycle: charm in public, condescension in private. During engagements, she appeared gracious and attentive, thanking staff in front of cameras, and even offering handwritten notes of gratitude. But behind the scenes, the narrative shifted. Staff were reportedly expected to be on call at all hours, often receiving messages at 5 a.m. demanding changes to schedules or plans. Boundaries were ignored. Protocols were dismissed. She expected us to function like personal assistants, not palace employees, said one former aide. If we reminded her of royal procedure, she'd accuse us of trying to sabotage her image. The situation reached a breaking point during a royal tour to Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands. The trip was seen as a critical moment for Meghan to cement her place in the royal family. Publicly, it was a success. Crowds cheered, speeches were well received, and Meghan's fashion choices dominated headlines. But privately, staff alleged the environment was toxic. Multiple aides later described the tour as a hellish ordeal, with one calling it the most stressful trip of my career. Tensions reportedly peaked one night in Fiji, when Meghan was scheduled to attend a reception hosted by UN Women. Sources claimed she became irate over minor details, including the presence of photographers and last-minute security changes. Aides scrambled to adapt, but nothing seemed to satisfy her. According to reports, she stormed out of a pre-event briefing, leaving her team stunned and demoralized. It was shortly after this trip that several staff began planning their exit. Princess, and, upon hearing these stories, didn't mince words. "This is not Hollywood," she allegedly said during a private debriefing. "This is a constitutional institution, and no one is above the structure, not even a duchess." Her words echoed through the palace, and had always been viewed as the monarchy's quiet enforcer, a woman who preferred action to headlines. For her to speak so candidly was a clear sign of concern. It wasn't about policing Meghan's every move. It was about preserving a system that had endured wars, abdications, and divorces. To end, Meghan's behavior wasn't just disrespectful. It was destabilizing. There were also concerns about Meghan's handling of racial and social issues within the palace. While she publicly positioned herself as a progressive voice, often speaking about equality, mental health, and gender rights, staff reportedly felt that her private behavior didn't always reflect those values. One aide, a woman of color, alleged that she felt ignored and dismissed during critical planning meetings. Another claimed that Meghan showed favoritism to external consultants over long-serving palace employees, often implying that the internal team lacked the modern perspective needed to manage her image. To end, this hypocrisy was particularly galling. If you want to lead change, start by treating the people around you with dignity, she reportedly told a confidant, not just the ones who put you in the headlines. Over time, the staff exodus became impossible to ignore. The palace launched quiet internal reviews. Meetings were held, and still, more departures followed. Eventually, the press caught on. Headlines began to shift from glowing praise to cautious inquiry. "Why are Meghan's aides resigning?" asked one front page. "Is the Duchess difficult?" posed another. For Anne, the damage had already been done. The monarchy had been caught flat-footed. What should have been a moment of pride, welcoming a modern, mixed-race woman into the royal fold, had become a crisis of integrity. Not because of prejudice, as Meghan would later suggest, but because of behavior, entitlement, disregard. What made it worse, and believed, was that Meghan's supporters refused to see the pattern. Any criticism was dismissed as racism or misogyny. Staff concerns were ignored, and those who dared to speak out were vilified as traitors or pawns of the tabloid press. "We didn't fail Meghan," Anne allegedly said. She failed the very people who tried to help her. In the end, the palace faced a choice: continue covering for Meghan's alleged treatment of staff or confront it head-on, and chose the latter, quietly at first, then more directly. She didn't hold press conferences. She didn't give interviews. But in family meetings, in one-on-one conversations with Charles, with William, even with the Queen, and made her stance clear. The institution must not become a victim of its own silence. This section of the story may be one of the most painful to accept for those who admired Meghan. It challenges the carefully crafted image of a duchess under siege, painting instead a portrait of a powerful woman who, according to those who served her, used charm as a weapon and kindness as a costume. Princess and didn't come forward to destroy Meghan. She came forward to defend those who couldn't. The aides who were told they weren't good enough. The staff who endured verbal barbs behind closed doors. The royal traditions that were bent until they broke. Because, as Anne has always believed, the strength of the crown isn't measured in applause. It's measured in how it treats its people, especially the ones no one sees. The rivalry between Meghan Markle and Kate Middleton was no secret. From the very beginning, Meghan's arrival into the royal fold was framed as a breath of fresh air, a dynamic, outspoken American who would shake things up in a stodgy British monarchy. But as time went on, it became increasingly clear that Meghan's ambition extended beyond mere reform. She didn't just want to modernize the monarchy. She wanted to outshine Kate Middleton at every possible turn. Princess Anne, known for her blunt assessments and unwavering loyalty to the royal institution, watched the unfolding drama with growing concern. Unlike her brother Charles, who was more inclined to avoid confrontation and wasn't one to stay quiet when she saw something threatening the monarchy's stability. And what she saw in Meghan's relentless desire to one-up Kate was more than just a clash of personalities. It was an ongoing battle for control of the royal narrative, a narrative that had, up until Meghan's arrival, been largely dominated by Kate. To understand Anne's perspective, it's important to grasp the subtle but powerful role that Kate Middleton has played in the royal family. As the future queen consort, Kate's position was never simply a matter of tradition. It was a carefully constructed image of grace, stability, and unwavering dedication to royal duty. Kate was the royal family's anchor, the calm presence amid the storm of tabloid scrutiny and public attention. And for Anne, who had spent a lifetime upholding the monarchy's image of duty over spectacle, Kate represented the very essence of what it meant to be royal. When Meghan entered the picture, she did so with a clear understanding of the media's fascination with her. The American actress, the former TV star, and the divorced woman, her story had all the elements of a modern fairy tale. The public ate it up, and with every photo op, every engagement, Meghan's star grew brighter. But Anne quickly saw the cracks in this glittering image. She noticed the ways in which Meghan seemed to push Kate aside, both in public and behind the scenes. At first, it was subtle. Meghan would wear a more dramatic outfit to events, trying to steal the limelight with bold colors and eye-catching accessories. Kate, ever the picture of poise in her more demure attire, was slowly overshadowed by Meghan's flair. But it knew better than to dismiss this as harmless competition. She had seen this behavior before. When a royal figure tried to turn the monarchy into a personal platform, it always ended in chaos. The tension between the two women became even more apparent during their first joint royal tour to Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands in 2018. What was meant to be a celebratory occasion, an opportunity for Meghan to introduce herself to the world as a royal, quickly turned into a battleground for attention. Kate, who had been on multiple royal tours before, knew the routine. She had learned the delicate balance of royal duties and personal privacy. But Meghan, with her Hollywood background, seemed determined to make the tour about herself. Sources close to the palace recall how Meghan would repeatedly try to dominate every conversation, making sure that the press focused on her causes and her personal interests, often at the expense of the engagements Kate was involved in. During a visit to Fiji, for instance, Meghan reportedly insisted on meeting with the country's leading women's rights activists despite the original schedule, which had been carefully arranged to highlight both her and Kate's respective charitable focuses. When it heard about this, she was furious. "She's turning it into a competition," she allegedly said to a trusted aide. "And that's not what the monarchy is about." But the rivalry didn't stop there. The dynamics between Meghan and Kate grew increasingly strained as Meghan's own celebrity status began to clash with Kate's more reserved, dignified presence. Meghan's ability to dominate the headlines with her fashionable outfits, candid interviews, and emotional appeals was something Kate had never aimed for. In fact, Kate had always embraced the more restrained role, knowing that the monarchy depended on consistency rather than constant media attention. But Meghan's desire to be seen as a modern royal led her to push boundaries in ways that made Kate uncomfortable. The most explosive incident came when Meghan reportedly accused Kate of making her cry during a private fitting for bridesmaid dresses before the royal wedding. The details were never fully confirmed, but the media frenzy that followed suggested deep personal animosity between the two women. For Meghan, the claim that Kate had reduced her to tears became a powerful piece of her narrative, feeding into the image of the persecuted outsider struggling to fit into the royal family. But Anne, having witnessed the behind-the-scenes reality, was less convinced by this portrayal. To Anne, the narrative was far more complex. She saw Kate as a woman who had dedicated herself to the monarchy, who had quietly supported her husband and upheld royal duty without complaint. Meghan, by contrast, seemed intent on creating her own narrative, one that put her at the center of attention and positioned Kate as a rival to be bested at every turn. "This isn't about fitting in," Anne reportedly said. "This is about creating a story, one where Kate is always in the shadows." Anne's assessment of the situation was not simply based on personal opinion. It was grounded in years of observing how the monarchy worked, or, more specifically, how it had to function to maintain its relevance in an ever-changing world. For Anne, the monarchy had always been about collective service, not individual stardom. And Meghan's approach, in her eyes, risked damaging that collective unity. As the months passed, the tension between Meghan and Kate continued to simmer. Meghan's friends began to speak out in her defense, accusing the press of unfairly targeting her and painting her as the villain in a story she had never asked to be a part of. Meanwhile, Kate remained publicly silent, adhering to her role as a royal who valued privacy and discretion over drama. Anne, however, could no longer stay silent. In one particularly frank discussion with her brother Charles, Anne reportedly said, "She wants to be the star, not the supporting player." But that's not how this works. The monarchy isn't about competing for the spotlight. It's about standing together as a family. Anne's words were sharp, but they carried the weight of experience, of having seen the monarchy evolve through countless crises, each one threatening its very foundation. The conflict between Meghan and Kate was not just a rivalry between two women. It was a microcosm of the broader struggle within the royal family itself. On one side, you had the traditionalists, represented by Kate and Anne, who believed that the monarchy's strength lay in its unity and service. On the other, you had Meghan, whose ambitions seemed to center on reshaping the royal family into something more aligned with her personal vision of activism, fame, and influence. In the end, The public face-off between Kate and Meghan became one of the defining moments of Meghan's royal tenure. While the world focused on the sensational headlines, the tears, the accusations, the drama behind closed doors, and saw something deeper, a monarchy at war with itself. A monarchy that was at risk of being torn apart by personal ambition masquerading as progress. And for Anne, who had spent her life protecting the integrity of the royal family, this was a battle that couldn't be ignored. The monarchy will survive, and said in a private conversation after the wedding. But whether it survives as an institution or as a celebrity circus depends on who gets to write the next chapter. The rivalry between Meghan and Kate would continue to simmer, occasionally flaring up in public, but for Princess Anne, it was a symptom of a larger issue, the struggle to define what the royal family stood for in an age where image mattered more than substance. When Meghan Markle joined the British royal family, the world watched with bated breath. A young, glamorous, biracial American actress marrying into one of the most traditional institutions in the world was nothing short of a modern-day fairy tale. Meghan, once a television star known for her role in Suits, seemed to represent the future of the monarchy, an embodiment of change and modernization. Her confidence, self-assuredness, and public advocacy for social causes immediately drew admiration. But as the weeks turned into months, and the months into years, Princess Anne began to see something more troubling. Meghan wasn't just navigating royal life, she was trying to transform it into something entirely different. For Meghan, royal life wasn't about tradition, duty, or restraint. It was about using her position to amplify her voice, further her brand, and reshape the narrative surrounding the monarchy. While many royals had learned to function within the established boundaries of their roles, Meghan's past in Hollywood, where fame and attention are currency, seemed to shape every decision she made within the royal family. And to Anne, this wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a collision of worlds that had no place in the royal family. Princess Anne, who had spent decades learning the intricacies of royal duty, quickly noticed the stark contrast between her own approach and Meghan's. To Anne, the monarchy wasn't a platform for personal expression or self-promotion. It was an institution built on duty, legacy, and service. It was a place where, once you entered, your personal desires had to be checked at the door. As Anne once said in a private conversation, the monarchy is not an image. It is an institution. And when you wear that crown, you wear more than just a symbol. You wear responsibility. For Meghan, however, that responsibility seemed less appealing than the opportunity to project a certain image of herself. Her public persona became carefully curated, designed to balance her newfound royal duties with her desire to remain a global figure. Meghan, in many ways, was not content with simply being a duchess. She wanted to be an icon, a beacon of modernity who would change the face of the monarchy. And while some admired her ambition, and couldn't help but see this as a fundamental misunderstanding of what it meant to serve the crown. In one of their private conversations, Anne reportedly remarked, "You don't come into the royal family to make a statement. You come to serve. And if you want to be the center of attention, then you're doing it for the wrong reasons." Anne's words were pointed, and perhaps even harsh, but they were rooted in a deep understanding of what the royal family represented. She had seen her mother, Queen Elizabeth II, spend more than 60 years carrying the weight of the monarchy with grace, humility, and restraint. To Anne, the idea that Meghan would treat her royal duties like a red carpet event was deeply troubling. It was as if the pomp and circumstance of royal life were merely an extension of the celebrity-driven world she had come from. This became particularly evident during public appearances. Meghan's carefully calculated style choices, her dramatic poses for photographers, and her decision to take on high-profile causes were all part of her strategy to maintain her star power. Anne, who had spent years in the background of royal events, observing from the sidelines, couldn't help but notice the difference. The monarchy is not a place to be seen, and is reported to have said, "It's a place to do." Anne's critique was not merely a matter of taste, it was about the very nature of royal duty. Meghan, in her previous life, had been the star of a television show where the goal was to be noticed, to shine in front of the camera. Now, as a duchess, the expectation was different. Meghan's role was not to dominate the spotlight, but to shine a light on others. This subtle but crucial difference was something that Anne had internalized from a young age. For Anne, the idea of using royal engagements as a platform for personal gain or to advance a personal brand was not just out of place, it was a betrayal of what the monarchy stood for. The most striking example of this clash came during the couple's trip to South Africa in 2019. While the trip was officially meant to highlight Meghan and Harry's charitable efforts, it quickly turned into an international spectacle. Meghan's interviews with journalists and her personal confessions about royal life garnered widespread attention. Her emotional revelations about the challenges she faced, her struggles with isolation, her feelings of being misunderstood, became the talk of the world. But for Anne, this was a step too far. The royals had long understood that their personal lives were off-limits to the press. Public vulnerability, especially in the form of personal interviews, was considered a violation of royal protocol. According to royal insiders, Anne was appalled by the entire spectacle. She was particularly taken aback by Meghan's decision to speak openly about the mental health struggles she faced. While Anne understood the importance of mental health awareness, she didn't believe it was the role of a royal to make such intimate struggles public. "We have our struggles like anyone else," Anne reportedly said, "but we don't use them to attract attention. We carry them privately, as is our duty." In Anne's view, Meghan's willingness to share these personal moments with the world was, in essence, turning her position into a form of self-therapy. And for the royal family, whose primary responsibility was to represent the people, this level of self-exposure was not just inappropriate, it was dangerous. As Meghan and Harry's popularity surged in certain circles and grew increasingly concerned, the monarchy, which had long been a symbol of stability and tradition, was being remade into a personal platform for the Sussexes. In interviews, Meghan described her life in the royal family as a prison, a gilded cage. For Anne, this metaphor struck a discordant note. "A prison," she reportedly said. "It's not a prison. It's a duty. And if you can't understand that, then maybe it's not the right life for you." Anne's criticisms were not aimed at Meghan personally. Rather, they were an indictment of the culture Meghan brought with her into the royal fold, a culture of celebrity, self-promotion, and image crafting that clashed violently with the stoic, duty-bound traditions of the monarchy. Meghan, in Anne's eyes, wasn't simply out of touch with royal expectations. She was redefining them in a way that posed a direct threat to the institution itself. Perhaps most troubling of all was Meghan's tendency to view royal life through a lens of Hollywood glamour. Unlike other members of the royal family who learned to navigate the expectations of the public with a certain grace and distance, Meghan's approach was far more personal. She actively sought the spotlight. She courted attention, and she used her royal title as a tool in the business of fame. This, in Anne's view, was a betrayal of everything the monarchy stood for: service without expectation, duty without reward. For Anne, the monarchy was a sacred trust, a role that required humility, sacrifice, and most importantly, a complete absence of ego. But Meghan, with her carefully curated image and relentless drive for recognition, seemed to see the monarchy not as an institution to serve, but as a vehicle for her own personal growth and fame. This was a mindset and simply couldn't. Meghan's insistence on turning royal life into a stage for personal expression was, in Anne's mind, not just a mismatch, it was a threat to the monarchy's very survival. The British royal family was not a Hollywood production. It was a centuries-old institution built on service, tradition, and the belief that the needs of the many outweighed the desires of the few. As the rift between Meghan and the royal family deepened, Anne's words rang louder and clearer. "You don't come into this life to make a name for yourself. You come to serve. And if that doesn't suit you, then perhaps it's time to rethink your place." This clash between Meghan's Hollywood mindset and the royal tradition that Anne held dear was not just a minor issue. It was the defining struggle of Meghan's time within the royal family. And as Anne watched from the sidelines, she knew one thing for certain: this battle, for all its glitz and glamour, would have long-lasting consequences for the monarchy itself. From the moment Meghan Markle joined the royal family, her life story seemed to be one of overcoming adversity. The biracial American actress who had faced the challenges of Hollywood, the criticisms of being an outsider, and the struggles of transitioning into royal life. Meghan's personal narrative quickly became one of defiance and resilience. But, according to Princess Anne, Meghan's use of victimhood wasn't just an authentic part of her journey. It was a weapon, a tool to gain sympathy, garner support, and ultimately control the narrative about her life. The first signs of this tactic appeared early in Meghan's royal tenure, when she began speaking openly about her personal challenges. At first, it seemed like a gesture of transparency, a way for Meghan to connect with the public by showing her vulnerable side. Her admission about the difficulties of adjusting to royal life was relatable, even endearing. Meghan spoke about how she struggled with loneliness, how the pressures of the press affected her mental health, and how she had been unprepared for the scrutiny that came with being a member of the royal family. For many, these confessions were powerful and raw. They humanized Meghan, showing a side of her that was not often seen in the public eye. But Princess Anne, with her decades of royal experience, quickly saw a darker pattern. She has a tendency to play the victim, and reportedly said in a private conversation, and not just when things are genuinely difficult. She uses it as a shield, a way to deflect blame, to control the narrative. To end, this was more than just a woman speaking out about her struggles. It was a calculated effort to reshape the story of her royal life into one of oppression, one that painted her as a martyr struggling against the forces of the monarchy itself. Anne's concerns intensified after the Oprah Winfrey interview in 2021, when Meghan and Harry made a series of explosive allegations about their time in the royal family. Meghan revealed that she had been struggling with her mental health, even contemplating suicide, while living within the confines of royal life. She also accused an unnamed royal family member of making racist comments about the color of her unborn child's skin. The interview aired to millions of viewers around the world, and the fallout was immediate and intense. The monarchy, already dealing with a host of internal tensions, was thrust into a full-blown crisis. From Anne's perspective, the interview was more than just a cathartic moment for Meghan. It was a masterstroke of media manipulation. "You can't have it both ways," Anne reportedly said after watching the interview. "You can't claim to be part of the royal family, benefiting from its privileges, and then turn around and say you've been wronged at every turn." To end, Meghan wasn't simply telling her story. She was constructing a narrative that cast her as a victim, one whose every action was justified because she had been wronged by the very institution she had joined. It was an appeal to the public's sympathy, a way to manipulate the emotional response of the audience. The most striking example of this came with Meghan's claim that she had been silenced by the royal family. She painted a picture of a woman who had been denied a voice, trapped in a gilded cage by a family and institution that refused to let her speak her truth. For many viewers, this narrative was compelling. It was easy to imagine a woman who, despite her privileged position, had been silenced by an oppressive system. But for Anne, who had spent her life within that very system, this portrayal was not only misleading, it was dangerous. "You don't get to be a royal by being silent," Anne allegedly said. "You get to be a royal by serving, by doing the work." And Meghan seemed to think she could skip that part. Anne's criticism was not just about Meghan's words, it was about the way she had weaponized them. Meghan had carefully crafted a story where she was both the victim and the hero, a narrative that allowed her to bypass the normal expectations placed on royals. She could claim to have been wronged by the palace, yet still enjoy the perks and privileges that came with being a member of the royal family. She could seek the media attention, the interviews, and the spotlight, while at the same time positioning herself as an outsider, a rebel fighting against a broken system. This ability to twist the truth and present herself as a victim was not something that Anne could overlook. The monarchy, for all its faults, was built on a foundation of duty and service. To Anne, Meghan's behavior threatened to erode that foundation. "What she's doing is rewriting the rules," Anne reportedly said. "She's making the royal family into something it's not, a platform for personal grievances and fame. And it's not just dangerous, it's irresponsible." As the months went on, Meghan's use of victimhood seemed to escalate. She appeared in high-profile interviews, often discussing the toll that royal life had taken on her mental health, the relentless pressure of the media, and the toxic environment that she alleged existed within the palace. But for Anne, the more Meghan talked, the more the public narrative shifted. Meghan wasn't just a victim of the royal family. She was a victim of the press, of public opinion, and even of her own family members. And as the victim, she was given a free pass to do whatever she wanted, regardless of how it affected the monarchy or the people around her. In one particularly telling moment, Anne reportedly commented, "She's making this all about her. Her pain, her suffering. But what about the institution? What about the people who have worked to uphold it? Where is their voice?" For Anne, the monarchy was not just a symbol of personal fame or emotional release. It was a legacy that needed to be protected. And Meghan's approach, turning every issue into a personal vendetta, was undermining that legacy. What made this even more troubling was the way Meghan seemed to frame her struggles in a way that resonated with modern cultural movements. She tapped into the language of victimhood that was so prevalent in today's media landscape, focusing on race, mental health, and the emotional toll of being in the public eye. These were real issues, of course, but saw them as being co-opted for personal gain. It's one thing to speak out about important issues and said. It's another to make everything about you. This strategy of victimization and believed not only damaged the royal family's public image, it also prevented real dialogue from happening. Meghan's claims of mistreatment were not an invitation to reform or improvement within the institution. They were a way to justify her departure, her exit from a system she had never truly understood. To end, Meghan's constant reframing of her narrative as one of victimhood was not a call for change. It was a strategy to manipulate the world into seeing her as a martyr. It became clear that Meghan had mastered the art of emotional manipulation, turning every slight, every criticism, and every difficulty into part of her personal saga. She positioned herself as the hero of her own story, the woman who had fought against the odds, who had overcome insurmountable obstacles, and who had triumphed in the face of adversity. But this wasn't heroism, it was self-serving drama. The monarchy doesn't need heroes, and reportedly said. It needs people who understand their role and their duty. Anne's words were not born from malice. They were born from a deep commitment to the monarchy's integrity. Meghan's emotional appeals were seen not as an attempt to find common ground, but as an effort to sidestep the very essence of what it meant to be royal. Victimhood, in Anne's eyes, was not the way forward. Duty was. And until Meghan learned that, her place within the family would always remain uncertain. For Princess Anne, loyalty to the crown had always been paramount. For decades, she had watched her family navigate the spotlight, often under intense scrutiny, but she had always remained steadfast in her support of the institution, and was no stranger to the demands of royal duty. She had worked tirelessly throughout her life, representing the monarchy at countless events, maintaining a quiet and dignified presence that commanded respect. Her role, like that of many royals, was to serve, to remain above the fray. But the situation with Meghan Markle was different. It wasn't just about a difference of opinion or a clash of personalities. It was about the future of the monarchy itself. The turning point came slowly, almost imperceptibly, as Anne began to witness the ripple effects of Meghan's actions. It wasn't just the personal drama that unfolded in front of the cameras. It was the erosion of the very values that the monarchy was built on. Over time, Anne became increasingly concerned, not just for the institution, but for the family she had spent her life serving. What had once seemed like a minor disruption had grown into a full-blown crisis, one that threatened to destabilize the monarchy's standing in the eyes of the British public and the world. It wasn't the bombshell Oprah interview that pushed Anne to speak out, nor was it the growing chorus of voices calling for Meghan's removal from royal duties. It was something more personal, a deep sense of betrayal. Anne, who had always been a quiet force in the royal family, watching and listening without drawing attention to herself, had always trusted that the monarchy's values were inviolable. Duty, sacrifice, humility. These were the principles that Anne had grown up with, the principles that had been instilled in her by her mother, Queen Elizabeth II. But Meghan, in Anne's eyes, wasn't just challenging those values. She was trying to rewrite them entirely. The more Anne observed Meghan's behavior, the more it became clear to her that Meghan was not only uninterested in fulfilling royal duties, but was actively undermining the very foundation of the monarchy. While Anne had always understood that public life as a royal could be difficult, she had also always believed that there was a higher calling to serve. But Meghan's apparent obsession with using her royal status as a platform for personal advancement, her seeming disregard for royal traditions, and her tendency to manipulate public opinion through emotional appeals made Anne question whether Meghan truly understood what it meant to be royal. It was during one of the many family meetings that the issue came to a head. Meghan and Harry had made another one of their controversial public statements, criticizing the royal family, alleging mistreatment, and portraying themselves as victims of an institution that had never fully embraced them. The press had been all over the story, and the narrative surrounding the Sussexes had become increasingly toxic. The royal family was under fire, not just from the media, but from a public that was divided over the treatment of the couple, and had kept her silence, as she always did, but the tension was building. She could no longer sit quietly on the sidelines. According to sources close to the family, Anne finally spoke up during a private gathering with her brother, King Charles, and other senior royals. Her voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the gravity of her words. "We can't allow this to go on," Anne is reported to have said. "Meghan has turned everything into a spectacle, and we are allowing it." We're letting her turn the monarchy into a reality show, and we're losing control of the narrative." Anne's words hung heavy in the room. She had always been known for her bluntness, but this was something different. This wasn't just a critique of Meghan's actions. This was an impassioned plea to protect the monarchy. Anne's concerns weren't just about the Sussexes' behavior, they were about the broader implications for the royal family. Anne had spent her entire life upholding the monarchy's reputation, representing the crown with dignity and poise. She had seen the pressures that came with being a royal, but she had always believed in the importance of remaining above the drama, above the fray. But with Meghan and Harry's actions threatening to overshadow everything the monarchy stood for, and could no longer remain silent. "I'm not saying we should kick her out," and continued, her voice steady. "But we have to set boundaries. We can't let her hijack the monarchy. We need to remind everyone of what we stand for. This is about duty, not fame." The room was silent after Anne's words. There were murmurs of agreement from some members of the family, but others seemed hesitant. The situation was delicate. The family was divided on how to handle the growing crisis, and Anne knew that speaking out publicly would only add fuel to the fire. But her sense of duty and her loyalty to the monarchy outweighed any concern for public backlash. The stakes were too high. In the days that followed, Anne took a step back from the public eye, but she continued to voice her concerns in private meetings. She met with senior advisors, urging them to take stronger action to protect the integrity of the monarchy. She knew that the family needed to present a united front, but she also knew that this would require difficult decisions. Meghan's public narrative had become too powerful, too entrenched. If the monarchy was to survive this crisis, it would need to reassert its authority. Despite her resolve, Anne was not one to seek drama or confrontation. Her criticism was measured, focused not on attacking Meghan personally, but on defending the institution she loved. "The monarchy is bigger than any one person," Anne reportedly said. "We can't let it be defined by personal grievances or public spectacle." This sentiment was a reflection of Anne's deep understanding of the monarchy's role in the British public's life. It was not about the royal family's individual desires, it was about the institution as a whole and how it represented the nation. As the months went by, Anne's concerns seemed to grow only more urgent. Meghan and Harry's actions continued to dominate the headlines, and their claims of mistreatment became increasingly sensationalized. Anne's frustration with the situation became more evident. She watched as the monarchy's reputation was dragged through the mud, with accusations of racism, neglect, and betrayal. The family's silence, and feared, was only making things worse. "If we don't speak up, the narrative will be written for us," Anne said to a confidant. "And that's something we can't afford." Eventually, Anne's frustration reached its boiling point. She could no longer stay quiet, and the moment arrived when she decided to speak publicly about her feelings. In an interview with a trusted journalist, Anne finally broke her silence, giving an honest assessment of the situation. She did not mince words. "The monarchy has always been about duty, not personal gain," Anne said. "And I don't believe that Meghan understands that. I don't believe that she ever did." These words, though direct, were not meant to attack Meghan. Rather, they were a clear statement of Anne's beliefs that had guided her throughout her life in the royal family. In the aftermath of Anne's remarks, the public response was mixed. Some praised her for speaking out, for defending the monarchy against the storm of scandal. Others criticized her for further deepening the rift within the royal family. But for Anne, the decision was not about the public reaction. It was about the future of the monarchy. She had always believed that the monarchy was bigger than any individual, and she was willing to speak out for its survival. Princess Anne's turning point was a moment of clarity, a moment when she realized that silence was no longer an option. The monarchy, she believed, was at a crossroads. And if it was to survive the turmoil created by Meghan and Harry, it would require leadership, clarity, and a commitment to its core values. Anne's words were a call to action, a call to protect the integrity of the institution that had been passed down through generations, and to remind the world of what the monarchy truly represented. As Princess Anne's frustrations with Meghan Markle's behavior grew, she was not alone in her feelings. While Anne was outspoken in her concerns, many other members of the royal family, though less public with their opinions, shared similar sentiments. The situation with Meghan and Harry was delicate, and there were no easy answers for how to navigate the growing tensions between the Sussexes and the rest of the family. But while Anne was vocal, many in the royal family chose to take a more measured approach, preferring to offer their quiet support to Meghan when necessary, while maintaining their public silence. One of the key reasons for this quiet endorsement, as Anne quickly realized, was the royal family's long-standing tradition of avoiding direct confrontation in public. The royal family, with its centuries-old traditions and protocols, operated behind a veil of privacy, where internal disputes and personal opinions were rarely aired in the media. It wasn't just about preserving the dignity of the monarchy, it was about protecting the family itself from the unrelenting scrutiny of the press. And so, while Anne's voice rang out with criticism, others in the family remained more circumspect, opting to support Meghan's position in a more subtle way. King Charles, for example, had always been a champion of modernization within the monarchy. He understood that the institution had to adapt to the changing times if it were to remain relevant. While Charles may not have fully agreed with all of Meghan's actions or attitudes, he saw her as an opportunity for the monarchy to appeal to a younger, more diverse audience. Meghan's American background, her celebrity status, and her outspoken advocacy for social causes were all seen as assets that could help modernize the royal image and align it with the issues of the day. For Charles, supporting Meghan, at least publicly, was a way to ensure that the monarchy remained in touch with contemporary values. Despite the criticism Meghan received from some members of the family, including Anne, Charles reportedly continued to offer his quiet endorsement. He believed that Meghan, like Diana before her, was going through a difficult transition into royal life. And while he may have had private reservations about her actions, he understood that a public show of support was necessary to keep the peace. In the delicate world of the monarchy, where appearances often mattered more than substance, maintaining unity within the family was essential. A fractured royal family would only provide ammunition to the press and critics who were already calling for Meghan's ousting. Prince William, too, while less inclined to publicly align himself with Meghan, did not outright condemn her. Instead, he distanced himself from the controversy, focusing his energy on his duties and his own family. Behind the scenes, sources close to the Cambridges claimed that William and Kate were concerned by Meghan's behavior but chose to remain neutral, not wanting to escalate the tension. William, who had always been seen as the future of the monarchy, likely understood that aligning too closely with either side could have long-term repercussions on his own image. Kate Middleton, who had already been thrust into the spotlight as the future queen consort, also found herself walking a tightrope. She had always been the picture of grace and diplomacy, and her priority was to avoid being drawn into the drama that Meghan and Harry's actions had created. Like William, Kate was reportedly concerned by Meghan's approach to royal duties, but she chose to keep her thoughts private, instead focusing on her work with various charities and her growing role in supporting the monarchy. It is said that Kate was personally hurt by the way Meghan had, at times, seemed to undermine her, particularly during public engagements, but she, too, understood that in the world of the royal family, unity was paramount. For Meghan and Harry, the royal family's quiet endorsement was a mixed blessing. On the one hand, the public support they received from Charles and others allowed them to continue their work as senior members of the royal family. Meghan's desire to modernize the monarchy was in many ways aligned with Charles's vision for the future, and he was not inclined to take drastic action against her unless her behavior became too disruptive. But on the other hand, the family's reluctance to speak out against Anne's criticisms or to rein in Meghan's actions made it clear that the Sussexes were largely left to their own devices. While Meghan may have felt supported by her father-in-law's quiet endorsement, she was increasingly isolated from the family's core. The tension between the quiet endorsement from some family members and the vocal opposition from others created an atmosphere of confusion and uncertainty within the royal family. The public perception was that the family was divided, with Anne taking a firm stand against Meghan's behavior while others, including Charles, appeared to offer support. This divide only fueled the fire for the press, which was quick to seize on the idea of a royal rift. But in reality, the royal family's handling of the situation was far more complicated. In private discussions, Anne continued to express her concerns about Meghan, often reiterating that the monarchy needed to remain united and strong. She feared that the quiet endorsement of Meghan's actions, particularly from Charles, was only prolonging the inevitable. "We're letting this go on, and it's damaging the institution," Anne reportedly said. "We can't keep pretending that everything is fine." For Anne, the lack of clear action from the rest of the family only made matters worse. She believed that by not confronting the situation head-on, the royal family was giving Meghan more power and influence, allowing her to shape the narrative to suit her own needs. Despite its criticisms, it was clear that the royal family remained committed to keeping the peace. The institution, after all, was larger than any one member, and the family understood that it needed to remain unified in the face of external pressure. The quiet endorsement from Charles and others was not an expression of full approval, but rather a strategic decision to avoid further public drama. It was a delicate balancing act, one that, and with her blunt nature, struggled to understand. In the end, the quiet endorsement wasn't about Meghan's behavior, it was about the future of the monarchy. The royal family knew that they needed to evolve to remain relevant in the modern world, and that meant embracing new ideas, new voices, and new perspectives.